I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, amid more exchanges of drones and missiles between Ukraine and Russia, we hear reports directly from the front line in the east and discuss the political situation in Kyiv and in Europe as Steve Witcoff meets with President Macron and other key figures in the coalition of the willing.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
It's the worst carnage that this world has seen since World War II.
Absolutely fascinating.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday, the 17th of April, 3 years and 53 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls, and staff writer at The Spectator, Svitlana Morenets. But first, over to Dom for the latest from the battlefield.
Let's start back in Russia. So for the second time, indeed the second night in a row, Russia's 112th Missile Brigade has been targeted by drones. The 112th, you'll remember, is one of the two units reportedly responsible for last Sunday's shelling of Sumy that killed 35 people. Now, it's thought the strike last night hit hangars used to store Iskander missiles at the base in the town of Shuya in Ivanovo Oblast. That's about 200 kilometers northeast of Moscow, 600 or 700 kilometers from the nearest bit of Ukraine. Yeah, good question. What is Russian air defense doing? We're not entirely sure. They say they shot down 71 Ukrainian drones last night, but clearly something got through because there's lots of images on social media you'll find of the base up in flames again. Now, in Ukraine, a Russian drone attack late last night killed 3 and injured 30 in Dnipro. That's right in the centre of the country. The strike damaged a dozen apartment buildings, numerous houses, a school, dormitory, and a gymnasium, officials said this morning. Other attacks across the country doubled those figures of killed and injured yesterday, at least doubled. Now, Russia launched 75 drones across the whole country, 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 3 S-300 or 400 variant anti-aircraft missiles. That comes from the Air Force this morning. Zaporizhia Oblast Governor Ivan Fedorov said Russian forces had carried out 350 strikes on 15 settlements in his area alone yesterday. President Zelensky sent a message of condolences to the family of 17-year-old Veronica, who was killed in that Dnipro strike. Odessa was also hit by drones again, 3 people wounded there. Residential buildings, a pharmacy and a church damaged, and the Sumy region came under aerial bomb attacks once again, while Kharkiv and Donetsk regions are also hit with ballistic missiles. Now, this morning, a Russian artillery attack in Nicholls in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast has killed 2 people, injured 5. That comes from Governor Serhiy Lysak reporting this morning. Now, a little bit further afield, Volodymyr Prokopov, who's the deputy head of the Kyiv city administration, has been charged with smuggling draft-age men abroad, according to Ukrainian media reports this morning. Under martial law, you remember, it's been in place since the start of the full-scale invasion and has just been renewed for another 90 days yesterday. Under that, Ukrainian men aged 18 to 60 are not permitted to leave the country except in special circumstances. Now, Mr. Prokopov was suspended before resigning last October whilst an investigation was going on that revealed suspicious real estate acquisitions by his family members. Interesting story from our Berlin correspondent, James Rothwell. He says Britain would support a decision by Germany to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Sources have told him that would be a boost to Friedrich Merz, the incoming German Chancellor. Mr. Merz, you'll remember, he signalled earlier this week that he was ready to send long-range Taurus missiles to Kyiv, but only with the agreement of France and Britain. Well, yesterday, a British official involved in foreign policy that's been speaking to the Telegraph said that the UK has long been in favour of Germany giving Taurus missiles to Ukraine, and the UK would back the move if it was taken now by the new Chancellor. The British source said, "We continue to work with our partners, including Germany, to equip Ukraine as best as we can to defend its sovereign territory." I should say thanks, by the way, to those who answered my plea the other day as to why Taurus was qualitatively better than Storm Shadow and Scalp, the British, same missile, basically, British-French long-range cruise missile. All three of them have dual warheads, i.e. one to blast its way into a structure and the main charge then to destroy whatever is in there. But I'm told that the Taurus main charge, the main warhead, is 3 times as powerful as the UK and French weapon. I was talking in terms of the Kerch Bridge, and again, experts have told me that bridges are notoriously difficult to drop, even with very high-powered cruise missiles such as this. It requires multiple hits on the side pillars to bring the bridge down, so that might be why the Kerch Bridge is still standing. A couple more for me, Francis. An interesting story today in Defence News, an online news media site. Big defence company Rheinmetall have agreed to buy a company called Hagedorn NC. That's a German maker of industrial nitrocellulose. It's going to expand its supply of raw material for artillery propellant. Now, the German defence giant Rheinmetall has said it's going to produce 1.1 million 155mm artillery shells annually, and nitrocellulose is a key component of the propellant bit of that. Now, Rheinmetall's chief exec, Armin Papagé, said the acquisition helps us to overcome a strategic bottleneck in propellant production. It gives us an important source of raw materials and continues the vertical integration along the entire value chain in the production of ammunition. Now, ignore that last bit of management word salad, but I think this is a bit of evidence here of the reindustrialization of defence manufacturing in Europe, which is a good thing. Rheinmetall seem to be getting ahead of the competition, perhaps. And just finally, a story that's doing the rounds today. The British Army has done a trial using, directed energy weapons, basically, an RF radio frequency directed energy weapon in a bid to bring down a drone swarm. So they've been using high frequency radio waves to disrupt or damage electronic components inside drones, which then either malfunction or crash because they're no longer viable as an aircraft. Now, there was a very gushy press release from the MOD, British MOD, that says the government has invested more than 40 million quid in researching directed energy weapons, which is pretty good, but peanuts in the grand scheme of things. So we need to do more of this. I was back in the military. I was working on projects with directed energy weapons about 10 years ago to burn out engine blocks of cars. So the physics works. It's just a question of then operationalizing it, making it actually able to be used on the front line. It's the right direction, but there's a long way to go. And I note that in this trial from the British Army, the swarm that they managed to bring down was 4 drones, so a small swarm, shall we say. However, that's the way that research and development works, going in the right direction, but plenty more required. But an interesting story to note nonetheless. And that's us up to date, Francis.
Thanks, Dom. A significant day today in the political realm as key European figures meet with Donald Trump's envoys in Paris, as President Zelensky urges greater pressure on Russian killers after that deadly night of attacks Dom was just talking about. Zelensky said Russia uses every day and every night to kill. Pressure must be applied to the killers and life must be helped to stop this war and ensure a reliable peace. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, and US Special Envoy Steve Witcoff arrived in the French capital earlier, ostensibly to seek common ground with Europe in their efforts to end the fighting, despite, of course, Washington sidelining European partners in discussions so far. It marks the first high-level discussions between the Anglo-French coalition of the willing and the White House's leadership since February. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is not there, but his Foreign Secretary David Lammy is, as is Jonathan Powell, the UK National Security Advisor, who we reported as being in regular contact with the Ukrainians, advising how best to work with the Trump team. The Kremlin, as one would expect, is spinning that this is merely a chance for Witkoff to inform the Europeans of the current status of the peace talks. They may be right in a sense, although I imagine that conversations will be much more developed than that, and there will be some candid conversations, particularly from President Macron, about the reality of how the Russians are approaching these negotiations. Bear in mind, Mr. Witkoff is not an experienced diplomat, and I think that really matters. And we've seen examples, I think, of a certain naivety from Mr. Witkoff in the last few weeks. We have no word of how these talks are going yet, but it's not hard to guess where the fault lines are and the nature of those conversations taking place. Do keep an eye on the Telegraph live blog today and over the weekend for updates. Staying with the US, President Biden has given his first post-presidency speech this week, which focused almost entirely on domestic affairs, although he did say in fewer than 100 days this new administration has done so much damage and so much destruction. It's kind of breathtaking. His national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, has also revealed some insights into American decision-making in the first months of the war, especially about not giving ATACMS to the Ukrainians. Now, that is interesting. Here's what he said. The reason we did not provide ATACMS originally was because we did not have enough of them in our inventory to act as a deterrent. Over time, we produced more. The second piece of it was that in those early months, the question of escalation was different. Did we learn? Were we willing to do things? We were willing to take on more risk as the war went on. We ended up providing Ukraine with a very large number of these systems. The idea that they made a major operational difference in the war has not been borne out by the evidence. So I think a lot has been put on this decision to say that if only we'd given ATACMS, then the war would have turned out totally differently. And yet the experience borne out on the battlefield is that that is not the case. Now, just a couple of points on this. The first aspect is that it underscores what we reported at the time, though it is worth noting that even with the might of the US intelligence services being fed into decision-making, there was a belief in those so-called Russian red lines, which we now know to have been totally false. The other point would be one I would explicitly challenge him on. ATACMS, he said, have not made a major operational difference. Some would debate that. But the crucial point is that one cannot justify their performance now compared to what their impact might have been then. For more on that explicitly, I highly recommend listening to my interview recently with Ambassador Mike Carpenter, if you missed it, who was in the room when many of these decisions were made, and who also offered, I would say, a different perspective on how early donations of ATACMS and other weaponry could have made a strategic difference on the battlefield, with the Ukrainians potentially making deeper inroads in late 2022. But returning to today's news, Secretary of State Marco Rubio formally announced yesterday after our broadcast the closure of the State Department's office responsible for countering foreign disinformation, citing concerns about free speech and the rights of American citizens. The office started as part of the US government's efforts to fight terrorist messaging online. It was called the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications. In 2016, it changed its focus to fighting propaganda and lies from foreign governments like Russia and China and got a new name, the Global Engagement Center. In December last year, this organisation was then reorganised again into the State Department's Counter-Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference Hub. A bit of a mouthful. Now, in a post on X, Rubio has said that the centre had overstepped its mission and worked to silence and censor Americans. While there are undoubtedly concerns about certain decisions made by these big American entities, especially in relation to their own citizens, the fact is that for many people, once again, this speaks to an inability for certain individuals to recognise the difference between deliberately designed disinformation coming from foreign governments, the authors of which surely can be legally and morally censored when their lies and distortions are designed by intention to spread inaccurate information, and just alternative points of view. There is a difference between those two things, and yet Elon Musk and others seem to believe that absolute free speech must be the priority, and that it will act as an automatic filter of what is true and untrue. Maybe they're right in the long term, but in the short term, it makes you dangerously exposed to distortions designed to mislead you. Now, given that context, one can understand EU Commission head Ursula von der Leyen's comments to the German Die Zeit newspaper, where she said bluntly, "The West as we know it no longer exists. Europe is still a peace project. We don't have bros or oligarchs making the rules. We don't invade our neighbours, and we don't punish them." So, lots going on, and I imagine that next week will be some interesting spin-offs from this encounter between Witcoff and Macron and others, because I think we'll learn a lot behind closed doors about what was said and what the implications of that will be for the war and indeed the coalition of the willing. But that's enough from me. Let's turn now to Ukrainian journalist and staff writer at The Spectator, Svitlana Morenets, who is dialing in from Ukraine and has just come back from a trip to the front line in the east. Svitlana, welcome. There's lots for us to discuss. But first, just tell us about your trip to the front and what you saw there.
Of course. Where do I start? I have been traveling through Donetsk region in the recent days, Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Pokrovsk, all that area. And I was with the commander of the Ukraine's National Guard, Vitaly Litvin. And we talked a lot about the war and the peace talks. And when I asked him or any of the soldiers about the ceasefire, all of them just laughed at me. And eventually I stopped asking because I realized I looked like a clown because not a single of them believes that the ceasefire is coming anytime soon because Russia is in the offensive along the entire front line. Also, they told me that Russia could use, of course, the 30-day pause because they need to transfer the troops from the Kursk region to Pokrovsk, as now the Kursk region is liberated from Ukrainian troops and they still want to capture Pokrovsk. And I've been trying to get into the city, but unfortunately for me, the weather was very sunny, which meant dozens of Russian drones flying over our heads. And even far from the city, we had to hide. So soldiers told me the chance that we would be hit by a drone if we entered Pokrovsk would be over 60%. So they told me they were not gonna bring me there because they wanted to leave too. But I visited some of the brigades nearby Pokrovsk, and the issues remain the same as they were last year, is the critical lack of infantry and artillery shells. Also, the few infantry that Ukraine has, many of them refuse to enter the close battles with Russians. For example, when they come in the small groups of, 4 or 5 people, often Ukrainian soldiers just give up their weapons, and it doesn't end well, as you know, that Russians have been executing Ukrainian posts, and the reasons for that Ukrainians don't engage in a close battles could be simply that they don't have enough training and they are just afraid to do so and they just simply want to leave. So it's a very heavy situation, and also with the drones, because the ones that Ukraine mass produced last year, for example, Eleka drones, I was at their factory last year in Kyiv, and now they are easily jammed by Russian troops and they just fall or lose connection, and they are not as effective as they were before. And I was in a house rented by soldiers near the front line where they have this station and a lot of big screens where they see the Russians and their positions from the drones. And we could see a group of Russian soldiers, about 10 people, just having a lunch at the table in the middle of the forest. And they were so relaxed. They didn't care about anything because they knew that Ukraine doesn't have enough means to strike them. And finally, the troops did strike them with the cluster munitions and they just ran away. But soldiers told me that it's very common, they just watch Russian soldiers being absolutely relaxed on the front line, and that out all of the targets that they can find on the front line, they can hit about 20%, unfortunately. And at the 80%, they just look at them from the drones. And they seemed very devastated when they told me about that. And they said that they need long-range artillery shells because they have the ones for the short range, like the first lines of the front line, but they can't strike deeper. And that is the problem right now. What else to add? I want to add something positive. I would say that the mood among Ukrainian soldiers is still, they are keeping strong and they say they are ready to keep fighting because they know they don't have any other choice. I also saw some of the fortifications around Pokrovsk, and It was a sad sight, to be honest, because there is a long anti-tank ditch every 10 or 15 minutes of driving and some few dragon teeth. And basically, that's all. And soldiers were like, well, it will be the problem of the infantry who will be retreating and how they will try to dig in there. But I just don't imagine how it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Svetlana. I have a question. You're just describing a whole number of kind of military roles that you were looking at there or witnessing. Can you talk to us about the ages of the people, the men performing those roles? So you're describing some infantry, you're describing drone pilots, you're describing mechanics and logisticians and engineers and all this kind of thing. I think the impression is that it's largely more elderly people who are doing the fighting, men in their late 30s, 40s, and even 50s. Was that your experience? Where were the young guys that you were seeing?
All the young guys are in the drone units. So when you come to any drone units, most of the men are under 30. When you go to the infantry, most of them are over 40. So you can notice that all the young ones are with the working with the technology, with the drones, and the older ones are digging the trenches, are in the infantry, are building fortifications, are on the first lines. And it's been like that for a very long time, I would say, since the beginning, because the Ukrainian army tries to preserve the young minds and train them abroad. I met a lot of soldiers who were trained in Britain, in Denmark, in Norway, in different countries, and most of them were very young.
I mean, did anybody talk about that, about why that there is such a clear delineation in ages and roles? I wonder if it is as simple as younger people can take the tech on more easily and get their heads around how to fly an FPV drone, for example. But I have also heard it said, and directly to me when I was in Kyiv once, that young people, as they approach the age of mobilization, can see what's going to happen, and therefore maybe a year or two away from the age of mobilization. So age 22 or 23, they go and join a drone unit so that they've already got a place to go to because they don't want to go to the infantry. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, so there are different stages at which soldiers could join the army. For example, if we talk about men who are under 16, if we talk about the young ones, right now there is a trend in Ukraine that their mother just bring them abroad before their names are put in the military register. So you can see at schools, the final years, there's very little young boys left. If we talk about those from 18 to 25, right now the conscription age is 25. And Zelensky recently passed a law that those from until 25, they can receive 1 million hryvnias and a lot of like free education and a lot of different benefits if they sign up. So only 500 of them did in 1 month, or even a bit more. I don't remember when Zelensky passed that law, but it is so few because Ukraine expected much larger number, but there were like thousands who applied, but finally signed only 500. And those who approach 25 years old and they know they can choose or to stay at home and not to leave the house at all because they are afraid to be conscripted to the infantry, or while they are 24 to sign a contract, receive that million hryvnias, receive the benefits and join the drone units because Ukraine promises them they will receive at least 2 months of training also abroad, and they can choose the specialty they want. So they receive a lot of the benefits. But if the man is 25 or 26 and he is caught on the street and he didn't update his military data, there is a higher chance that he could be sent to an infantry as a punishment.
Yeah, now we're reporting today that Volodymyr Prokopiev, who's the deputy or was the deputy head of the Kyiv city administration, has been charged with facilitating draft age men getting out of the country. How widespread do you think that problem is about young men paying to get themselves away from conscription?
More than you can imagine. I personally know people who were swimming through the river into Romania to escape the draft, or who are paying bribes. There are a lot of like secret Telegram channels, and you can join them, and there are like guides You can pay up to $20,000, and they will give you the route in the Carpathian Mountains, how you can escape. You just bring a tent with you, food for some days, and you travel through the mountains, hoping to cross the border and not to be caught. Many, many men are doing that. We don't know exact numbers, how many are fleeing, but I would say in these 3 years, we can talk about thousands of them. And there are a lot of ways to do it, or to have a fake disability, or marry a disabled woman, or to divorce with your wife and take the custody over the children, and they won't be able to conscript you. So there are many, many ways to avoid the draft, but few Ukrainians can afford to pay those amounts of money. $10,000, it's very big money in Ukraine. So most, I would say, just stay at home. They don't leave the house. If they leave, they call a taxi if they need to go somewhere, but it's very rarely.
Now, I think you may have just answered my question there, but when you were talking about money, now you said that in this recent recruitment drive, which I think started in February, the latest presidential program to try and get people to join up, they were offered 1 million hryvnia, just for our listeners. So that's about £20,000, 27,000 US dollars. I was going to ask you to put that into context about how big a difference would that make to somebody's life? Is that a good offer from the government?
It's a big money. The average salary in Ukraine is £300 a month. So one receiving £20,000, it's a lot of money. And also you can enroll the university for free. You receive 0% of interest when you want to buy a flat. So there are a lot of these perks that Russian army is offering for its soldiers too. But you can't compare the scale, because in Russia they receive up to £50,000 for signing a contract in the first year, or in case of their death, their family receive that amount. So it's much more than Ukraine can offer.
Svitlana, this is so interesting. Thank you for your time today. I've got one final question about the front line there in Pokrovsk before we turn to other subjects, and that is, we've reported on the podcast, of course, over many months now, predictions around that city, that town falling. What were the soldiers telling you there about the prospects, a timeline of that falling? Or are they still optimistic that it has weeks or months to hold? Or do they think that this is something that will eventually be given over in quite short order?
Of course, much depends on the aid and on the amount of shells Ukraine will receive, but Russians have adopted a strategy that they just come from the flanks, from the north and from the south, and they don't storm the city from the front. And in this way, they lose less men, and they just cut the supply routes to the city. And right now, they are trying to take under the fire control the city from Pavlograd in the Dnipropetrovsk region to Pokrovsk. And if they take the control over that road, then the Pokrovsk will likely fall in weeks. But they are still far from that. And I would say the soldiers are quite optimistic for now, because last year we have been talking about Pokrovsk and it seemed like we were going to lose the city in days. But as Russians threw a lot of their brigades to the Kursk region, it eased the pressure from the Pokrovsk for some months, and Ukraine could stabilize its positions there. But now the fighting resumes there, and there are like over 80 attacks a day on Ukrainian positions just in the Pokrovsk area. So we will see in the coming weeks more and more of that.
Well, thank you very much for that, Svitlana. Let's move into another realm that you've been looking at whilst you've been in Ukraine, and that is, of course, the political situation there. As we've reported this week, the martial law passed again, which I think takes us now through to August, which means there doesn't have to be a presidential election for some more months. What is the mood like amongst the Ukrainian politicians that you've spoken to?
So this time I decided to speak to the opposition to Zelensky, and I spoke to figures from 3 different parties: European Solidarity, which is the main opposition party to Zelensky, Holos Party, and also Clever Politics Party. And all of them told me quite the same disturbing thing, that Zelensky is becoming authoritarian. And let me explain what they mean by that. So first of all the opposition agrees that there can be no elections until the war is over because they understand that lifting martial law would be really dangerous and Russia could just use it and overrun Ukraine while Ukraine is trying to have elections. And they also agree that Zelensky remains a legitimate president during the wartime. But the problem, they say, is that the parliament has completely lost its power. Ukraine is a parliamentary presidential republic, but the martial law has allowed Zelensky to consolidate all the power into his hands and of his closest allies, for example, Andriy Yermak. And his party, the Servant of the People, they have a majority in the parliament, but many of them, they just don't come to the parliament or they don't vote. So his party doesn't have enough votes to pass a single law. And so Zelensky uses the politicians from the banned former pro-Russian party. And they're still in the parliament. Actually, their mandates could be revoked, but Zelensky doesn't do it because then he wouldn't have enough votes to pass anything. And of course, the opposition is not voting for most of the laws because they are fighting between each other. And Petro Poroshenko, the Ukraine's former president and the leader of the European Solidarity Party, he said that Zelensky must create a unity government, like to form a coalition with the opposition so they can discuss the laws and vote together, and to show to Europe, especially to the Trump's administration, that Ukrainian government is working together, that Zelensky is not a dictator, as Trump said before. But Zelensky refused that proposal. And I asked why, and they told me it's not only about the competition, but because he just likes to take all the decisions by himself and just to say to the parliament, do this, and do this, and that's all. And also the opposition leaders were restricted from traveling abroad. All of them who I talked to said they were abroad in these three years, like 2-3 times for meeting delegations or the politicians from different countries. They're just not given permissions because deputies from Zelensky party, all of them go abroad frequently. It's not about restrictions for men. All of them go abroad and have these trips to talks with British politicians or US politicians. But when it comes to oppositions, they don't receive the permissions. So they were complaining about Zelensky just taking any power from the opposition. He also controls all of the TV. He's United Marathon News. They talk not only about the war on these TV channels, but they just promote Zelensky and his party, and they don't invite anyone from opposition just to speak there for debate for anything. So he just took power all of the TV. And the last thing that I want to add that when it comes to peace talks on the minerals deal with the US, the opposition finds the news from the media as the rest of us. Zelensky doesn't share anything about how it's going. Opposition several times summoned the foreign minister to the parliament to explain what's happening, but he simply doesn't come. He is legally obliged to, but he still doesn't. And they're like, how can this be happening? And they're all angry. And honestly, I can understand why Zelensky is doing that because he wants to make sure that all of his plans to end the war, they go well and nobody interferes into his relationship with the Trump administration. But at the same time, I can understand the opposition who want to take part too in the process, but they are not allowed.
It's very, very interesting. Thank you, Svitlana, for relaying some figures in the opposition's perspective on what's going on in the political scene at the moment. My question is, did you get a sense at all that there might be the prospect of elections in a shorter time frame than many might expect? Obviously, you've said already that the opposition figures recognise there can't be an election until there is a ceasefire. But was there a sense that they expect that to happen quite soon? Or does this still feel like something that's a very long way away?
It depends who I talked to because some of them were like, no, until the war is over, we shouldn't talk about the elections at all. And some of them were like, oh, I'm gonna apply to become president. And they were talking about what they could do if they are elected. So some are ready trying to learn to get some points for the elections. And I don't know if you heard of one politician called Oleksiy Goncharenko from a European Solidarity Party. And he was the only politician who refused to vote for the martial law yesterday. He voted against it, and when asked why, he was like, it's because there is no law of demobilization of soldiers and all of the other reasons. And everybody understands that Ukraine can't demobilize soldiers right now because we don't have enough infantry, and for all of those many reasons. But he is already working for a certain amount of Ukrainians who are against the conscriptions and who would like the war to end no matter how. And you just can see, and he is also already printing the t-shirts with his face. And you can see that he started the pre-election campaign. Fortunately, he's the only one that I can see for now actively starting the pre-election campaign, but I think we will see more in the coming weeks or months.
Svitlana, you say that the opposition parties find it difficult to get out of the country, to go and discuss issues with international partners and what have you, and that there's not a lot of debate in Parliament. There's this centralisation, as you've described it, around President Zelensky. But from chatting to politicians and the wider public alike, what issues do you think the opposition parties and the public want to see discussed and debated outside of the conduct of the war? But what else do they want to talk about?
Maybe to the corruptions issues. For example, we have the scandals this week about that the Kyiv administration has been building the apartment blocks on the illegal sites or on the place of parks and stuff like that, and they received the permission from the presidential office. So the opposition wants to discuss those topics as well. But I would say still the war is the priority for everyone and for ordinary Ukrainians.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And maybe corruption is the issue. And I know there's obviously been a long-standing drive against corruption from Zelensky's administration. But, it seems beyond the conduct of the war, and that's obviously dominating right now, but it seems a bit of an indulgence, dare I say it, for the opposition parties to be saying, well, we're not discussing education or healthcare or transport or what have you. And I'm not suggesting they are. I'm just trying to work out what it is that they feel they're not able to debate, because, of course, normal life isn't and cannot go on at the moment in Ukraine.
I want to say that they do discuss education in Ukraine and or health services, all of these topics that are not connected to the war. They can be discussed freely in the parliament, but those connected to the war, they just get shut down very quickly.
Thank you very much, Svitlana. Always fascinating hearing your insights.
The troubles in Northern Ireland are raging. Civilians find themselves caught in the crosshairs.
My father was covered in blood.
Behind the violence, there's a sinister secret.
He is probably the most high-profile British agent that we know of to date.
A covert unit of the British Army is connected to a string of murders.
If you could recruit a terrorist, that's the cream on the cake.
And the fight for justice continues.
There wasn't just one agent. Most of them were agents.
The latest podcast from The Telegraph. I'm Cara McGugan, and this is Bed of Lies. Search Bed of Lies wherever you're listening to this.
So, Dom, can you take us to your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. So the other day, I asked folks for advice anyone could give to a volunteer who's about to deploy to Ukraine with the International Legion, the International Brigade. Thank you to all who replied. Mixed bag, actually. Really interesting responses. Paula, thank you, Paula, spoke to a friend of hers who has volunteered, who gave her the advice to pass to us. Take waterproof socks, waterproof pouches to protect stuff, radios, iPads, etc., range cards. Take a decent gas mask if you can get one. Call sign Poe, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, P-O-H, Poe. Thank you. Poe says take a good sleeping system that you're comfortable with. So that's a good sleeping bag, a good bivvy bag, a waterproof shell, a good roll mat to go, that you can lie on, and a good tarpaulin or something to go over the top to protect you from the weather. Take good ear and eye protection that you prefer and that you have already fitted, that is comfortable for you. And also, Poe says, take expectations of losing everything and having to buy it all again. Poe said, I have had the worst luck by getting everything blown up, stolen or lost. So fair enough. Oh, Poe also says, take money. Poe says Kyiv hosts some of the best equipment that you can purchase in terms of body armor, helmet, other bits of uniform, much better prices than you can source outside the country. And then another individual emailed, thank you so much. I'm not going to give the individual's name for various reasons that will become apparent, but this writer is an international soldier in Ukraine from Britain. And this individual says the best advice is to join one of the many Ukrainian units, not the Foreign Legion. This individual says it's full of Colombians fighting for money, not ideology, and casualty rates are extremely high. Now, of course, health note here, folks, I don't know these individuals. I'm not vouching for them. I think the earlier advice about waterproof kits, sleeping bags, what have you, that's fairly standard, I would suggest. I can't vouch for that final comment. It is very interesting. I've asked the individual again to expand on these comments about why they're recommending Ukrainian units, not the international brigade. Yet to hear back, but there will be a story there, no doubt. Anyway, thank you to everybody who suggested and provided advice there. Please do keep it coming. It's a fascinating subject and one that we will keep in touch with.
Thank you, Dom. Friday and Monday are the Easter bank holidays here in Britain. So as we always do on public holidays, we will be releasing special episodes before normal service resumes on Tuesday. We'll keep the first episode a surprise, but the second, on Monday, is the panel event with Stephanie Baker, Mark Galliotti and Keir Giles that Dom chaired at the Oxford Literary Festival a few weeks ago. It's really worth a listen. Also, if you're in London tomorrow, Good Friday, I'm joining a panel in the evening with Dr. Edward Hunter Christie and Cormac Smith for an event at the Ukrainian Culture Centre organised by Jonathan Fink of the Silicon Curtain channel, which is, if you're not familiar, a fantastic resource for in-depth interviews on all manner of subjects relating to the war. There'll be links in the show notes for tickets. All they ask is for a donation and to Jonathan's channel. Hope to see you there. And Svitlana, as our guest, where do you want to leave our listeners as we enter the bank holiday weekend?
I want to say a bit about the Russian strikes on Sumy and Kryvyi Rih, which I would say Ukrainians are still mourning the people killed there. And it's very surprising to see Donald Trump refusing Zelensky's proposal to sell Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. And it's very devastating to see that, honestly, because I'm here, for example, right now in Kyiv, and there are the drone attacks and missile attacks every night. And not all of them Ukraine can shut down, and Russia now uses the cluster munitions in their bombs. That's why we have so high civilian casualties in the moment. So I would like to understand why Donald Trump is refusing to sell those air defenses to Ukraine, and why the other leaders are not pressing him to do it, because I don't see how he can explain that, honestly, and then just feel lost. And I would like to see him at least selling the weapons for Ukraine, because he told previously that he doesn't want to give Ukraine anything for free, and now Ukraine is offering to buy something and it is not receiving anything. And so what conclusions can we draw from that? Is he completely on Russia's side right now? I don't know, but there is gonna be Easter on Sunday, and there is no ceasefire. His negotiations didn't work, so I think he has to adopt a different strategy from appeasing Russia.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and to stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from Ukraine, please subscribe to The Telegraph at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciated this podcast, please follow Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist in your language. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. We're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Thank you, and best wishes from London.